Hey, I'll see you in Rutherford, New Jersey, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Ontario, California, Davenport, Iowa, Las Vegas, Chicago, and Grand Rapids, Michigan. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. Hi, you know what? We got Scott Ritter back with us because I wanted to get his expert opinion and have him explain this story for us. So this is a big story from today. Revealed NATO plan to get U.S. troops to the front line to fight Russia. Alliance prepares for rapid deployment of American soldiers amid fears Moscow is plotting major war with Europe. NATO leaders previously agreed to ready 300,000 troops for rapid deployment. So this is U.S. troops are going to go fight Russia? Tell me what this means.
Well, right now the United States has approximately 100,000 troops in Europe. That's not enough to wage a war today. But it's enough for a presence, a tripwire. But if there was a war with Russia, NATO would need to mobilize a considerable amount of combat-capable troops. They simply don't have them today. This 300,000 rapid deployment force exists only on paper at the moment. But one of the problems NATO has is because it's a peacetime military alliance. How do you get troops from the port to Eastern Europe? All the NATO logistics that existed in the past got troops from NATO ports or NATO airfields in Western Europe to Germany, which was the front line. West Germany was the front line with East Germany, the Soviet Union, etc. But now that the NATO has expanded to the Russian frontier with Poland, the Baltic states, Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, there isn't infrastructure to support this, and there's insufficient troops in. We used to have 300,000 troops in Europe and could deploy another 250, 300,000 within 10 days. Today we have 100,000, and we don't have the ability to surge forces in. And so any reinforcement to take place is we'd be bringing troops over on ships. They'll arrive in ports. One of the big ports they would arrive would be in Hamburg or Antwerp. Previously, they'd get off the ports and ride on German highways to a German front line. Now they have to cross borders. NATO hasn't figured out how to move troops from one nation to the next, how to do customs clearance, how to avoid bottlenecks. Two, none of their highways or bridges have been reinforced to handle large-scale military movement. So even once they allowed it to happen, the infrastructure would collapse. Three, there's no redundancy, meaning that if there's one bridge over the river that you got to get your army over and the Russians blow up that bridge, you don't have a plan B. D, how do you get troops that you can get them to Poland, but how do you get them to Romania? How do you get them to Finland now that Finland joined? And so what NATO's doing now, they just did an exercise for instance, in Norway, landing a couple hundred American and Finnish and Norwegian Marines. And they wanted to get them to Finland, to get them from Norway over the mountains, down through Sweden, up into Finland to the front line. They realized the infrastructure doesn't exist. So if Russia was to go to war with Finland, NATO couldn't reinforce Finland, even though they promised them they could. So they have to spend money now building superhighways, new bridges, port facilities, and then they have to plan what happens when Antwerp no longer exists because the Russians took it out. Where do you land? What's your plan B port? And this is what this plan is right now. NATO is saying, we can't do this, so we have to come up with a plan to do it. The bad news is it makes it look like NATO and Russia are going to war. You know what the good news is, Jimmy? They can't do it. It's too expensive.
Is that to scare us?
So why? Yeah. So has Putin been threatening to go to war with these smaller countries?
No, Putin has been saying the exact. All Putin has done is defeat NATO and their proxy Ukraine in Ukraine. Putin has humiliated NATO. The defeat of NATO's technological superiority. You remember when the Leopard tank was the magic weapon?
Yeah.
But they found out that it burns. The Abrams was the magic tank. Oh, it burns too. There's no such thing as a magic weapon. All the weapons that the West thought would give it the technological edge over the Russians don't. HIMARS, that multiple launch rocket system, it uses a GPS guided warhead. The Russians jam it. The HIMARS doesn't hit what it's supposed to hit. The same thing with ATACMS. It gets jammed. There are no magic weapons, and this has humiliated NATO. And the other thing NATO realizes, and General Cavoli, who's the U.S. commander of ground forces, said, NATO had never imagined the scope and scale of the violence taking place in Ukraine. They weren't prepared to suffer the casualties for the sustainability factors. And so what's happened is that NATO realizes it can't fight the Russians, that the Russians have the better army, the better way of doing this. And so NATO now is screaming. They have to turn to their taxpayers and say, you got to pump up hundreds of billions of dollars now to rebuild our military. And the taxpayers are saying, why? Why are we going to do that? Well, because the Russians are threatening to invade. The Russians aren't threatening to invade. All Russia's done is beat NATO in a war that NATO started.
So why then would this, why? So it says revealed. So that means that on purpose, NATO revealed this plan.
For us to be scared.
And who is that? Is that for us to be scared? What's this for?
Well, I think the reality is somebody in NATO went, this is insane, and they revealed it because, remember, this is just paper. These are just words. Those 300,000 troops don't exist. They haven't recruited them yet. They haven't trained them yet. Germany, to give you an example, has said that they're going to expand this battalion they have, a couple hundred men in, I think, Lithuania, to a brigade of 4,000 men. Oh, they're supposed to make everybody scared on that. It may not happen because Germany has to first recruit the troops who agreed to be stationed overseas. They can't just take a brigade out of their army and station in Lithuania. The Constitution prohibits that. So they have to recruit 4,000 Germans who agree to be stationed overseas. And then they have to equip them, which means they have to build new tanks and armored vehicles, except they can't because America blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which brought in the cheap gas, which allowed the steel plants to produce steel. Those steel plants had to shut down because they can't afford to produce steel. Germany can't make steel to make tanks. They can't make the tanks to make to build the battalions. This is all of NATO is a disaster like this. It's just a one big giant cluster, you know what, and So I think what happened here is somebody looked in there and said, we need to nip this madness in the bud. Let's reveal this plan so that Scott Ritter can mock it on Jimmy Dore's show and kill it.
And so that's what this is? So this isn't anything to actually be afraid of?
We can't do it. That's like me, Jimmy, that's like you saying, okay, Jimmy, tonight I'm announcing that I'm going to build a space rocket and I'm going to go to Mars. And you're like, oh my God, if Scott goes to Mars, that'll disrupt the universal balance. We're all Scott ain't going to Mars because Scott can't build a rocket. NATO can't do anything that's on that headline. They can't do any of that. So Biden recently gave the go-ahead for Ukraine to go ahead and attack targets inside Russia. Yeah.
Is that actually a major escalation? And I saw Medvedev kind of hint that this could turn nuclear. Is that also something we should worry about?
This is where I have to get really, really serious right now because I try to answer things. I mean, I answer it honestly, but like that headline's a joke. So I bring humor into it. You know, the Bulletin of American Atomic Scientists, they have a thing called the Doomsday Clock. And recently they set it at 90 seconds. They say we're 90 seconds until midnight. I'm here to tell you right now that if you were being honest about the Doomsday Clock, you would set it at 1 millisecond to midnight. And what I mean by that is, as you and I are speaking right now, this is the most dangerous situation the world has found itself in since the Cuban Missile Crisis. We are this close to a thermonuclear war. One miscalculation, one mistake. As we are talking, this miscalculation could occur. And the Russians will send nuclear weapons into Europe. We will retaliate, and the world will end within a span of an hour and a half. This is real. I hope everybody listening to me right now goes to bed and shakes and is scared, because you need to be scared. You need to start calling people in Washington, D.C. saying, what the hell are you thinking? Because the whole purpose of allowing the Ukrainians to do this is to bring harm to Russia in hopes that Russia will accept a peace plan coming out of a peace conference that's taking place in a week that isn't going to take place because nobody's going to attend because the Ukrainians are a joke. But we can't admit that, so we give the Ukrainians permission to do what the Ukrainians say they want to do, which is to bring harm to Russia, in Russia. If you go back, Jimmy, just to put this in perspective, go back to, you know who Ray McGovern is, the former CIA guy, great guy.
Yes.
In the buildup before this became a war between Russia and Ukraine, the Russians actually submitted a draft peace treaty to the United States and said, this is how we could prevent a war, by talking about how to come up with equitable relationships. In the discussion that the Russians had with the United States, they said, what we really fear is that you're going to put missiles in Ukraine, and those missiles are going to strike our strategic facilities. Because you see, when the Soviet Union existed, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union.
Right.
So all of the strategic things, the command centers, the missile silos and everything, were in the center of Russia, far away from NATO. It took NATO a long time to get there. But if Ukraine joins NATO and you put these American missiles up to the front line, they can now strike Russia's strategic command and control. And Russia said back then before the war, if you put missiles in Ukraine, it will be a war. Jimmy, we put ATACMS missiles with a 300-kilometer range, a 300-mile range, 300-mile range in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are using them to strike targets in Russia. Targets, the range arc includes command and control, radars, missile silos, nuclear storage facilities. Russia cannot allow this to happen. They can't. It's existential in nature. And if Ukraine makes a mistake right now as we talk, if Ukraine makes a mistake and fires a missile that hits a Russian command and control center, Russia will nuke Europe.
Really?
Right now, as we speak.
Well, I mean, so doesn't Russia understand that that would also mean the nuclear annihilation of Russia?
Vladimir Putin has addressed this. He said, we won't start the war. We have a nuclear doctrine that's quite clear. But if you hit us with nuclear weapons, or if you use conventional weapons that threaten our nuclear deterrence, we will respond. We understand that we will go to heaven as martyrs, but you'll go to hell as the people who started a nuclear war. That's the Russian approach. The other thing that Vladimir Putin has said, and I'm saying this because there's people out there who say, well, Russia's just bluffing. He has gone on national TV and spoken to the Russian people and said, there will be no phone calls. There will be no negotiations. All orders have been signed. All orders have been issued. When the time comes, it will happen instantaneously.
Do you think Americans are just so used to living with nuclear weapons and they think that they'll never be used?
No, I think what happened is, because we lived with nuclear weapons in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and early 80s, and we were scared to death. I can tell, I grew up there, Jimmy. I was scared. I lived in West Germany. I lived next to a nuclear weapons storage facility. My dad was a commissioned officer in the Air Force at a headquarters. On occasion, he would go into the bunker, which you go into the bunker when you're ready to go to war. He would call my mom and say, gather the kids, because this might be it tonight. The whole world might end. And we would be there because we lived next to the nuclear storage facility that would get hit with a nuclear weapon, and we would die. I played football when my dad was in the bunker. They had an Autobahn going by. And you know how when sunlight hits a rearview mirror, hits a windshield, every once in a while you get that flash?
Yeah.
I'm on the football field looking at flashes on the Autobahn thinking, oh, shit, oh, that's it. It's over. As a freaking high school kid, I was scared to death of nuclear weapons because they were an ever-present reality. I learned to respect nuclear weapons, which is why when I was a weapons inspector in the Soviet Union in 1988 to 1990, destroying these very same weapons, I was so damn happy because I said, we're getting rid of these things. We're creating peace and harmony in the world. I might grow up to have children and grandchildren. Yay. And then we went into this period of time where the weapons still existed, but people forgot about them. People forgot to be afraid of them. People don't think they're real. People can't imagine that they're going to be used. I'm here to tell everybody in your audience that the United States, like Russia, has a nuclear war plan. You know how we win the nuclear war? This is the sickest part. by being the largest remaining civilization on the planet. Now, some estimates say that we will be down to 30 or 40% of our current capacity. But as long as we can be the largest remaining civilization, we will continue American global domination in a post-nuclear environment. That's the definition of victory in a nuclear war. And this nuclear war could happen literally right now as we speak because of this.
Strangelove.
So why do you think there isn't more people screaming with their hair on fire about this to stop the Biden administration from letting Ukraine do this?
Well, I mean, I tried. I was supposed to speak at the Rage Against the War Machine rally, right. And the libertarians shut me down because I'm a bad guy, apparently.
Right.
I've been screaming till I'm blue in the face. The problem is, again, I'll just be honest, the anti-war movement in America is so fractured. They just can't get along. They're a bunch of hippies that have their own. They want their own slice of the pie, and they just can't agree. In 1982, in June of 1982. The anti-war movement put 1 million people into Central Park to protest against nuclear weapons and to protest in favor of arms control. Ronald Reagan, the crazy, communist-hating Republican president from hell, he's the guy that signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, Jimmy. He's the guy that sent me to Russia to get rid of those weapons. He was influenced by 1 million Americans marching in Central Park. Why can't we get 1 million Americans marching in Central Park today? Why, on this survival, the very survival of our nation, of the world, why can't we motivate all these people out there to realize that any other cause you have is meaningless if the world ceases to exist?
I was part of the people trying to convince people like Code Pink and the other people that, the joke I do in my act is like, well, yeah, I'd like to stop a nuclear war, but not with those people.
Not with them. No.
Yeah, not with them. So, I mean, it just shows that they're not really serious about it, and it's more of a cosplay organization. And it wasn't just Code Pink. It was a lot of people. So, wow. Well, 1 second to midnight as the doomsday clock.
That's Dr. Strangelove. I can't believe that's the plan. That movie's the plan?
That movie's the plan?
Again, when we first came up with the nuclear war plan, John F. Kennedy was the first president to be briefed on it. It was called the Single Integrated Operation Plan, or SIOP. He went to the Pentagon to get briefed on it. When the Pentagon briefed him that the plan was to destroy the world, to keep America, then Kennedy turned to his advisor and said, and we call ourselves the human race. And then he screamed at the guys. He said, this is insane, literally insane. You can't ask me to push the button to destroy the world. You have to give me options. Then he was assassinated. When Lyndon Johnson became president, he was briefed on it. You know what his response was? This is insane. You can't ask me to destroy the world. You have to give me options. But the Pentagon only has one option: destroy the world. They pretend to have other options. They've briefed every president up during the Cold War on that. Every single president, including Ronald Wilson Reagan, said, this is insane. You have to give me options. And then the Cold War ended. And then we forgot about nuclear war. We forgot that there was this plan there. And then George W. Bush, after 9/11, said, we can never allow this to happen again. We have nuclear weapons. Find a way to make them relevant again. And now we lived in an environment where there was no more Soviet Union. We didn't have a threat. And so we started to use our nuclear supremacy as a way of leveraging global power. And we now have guys who have reimagined nuclear war using the same models that we used back in the 60s, that when we go to war, if there is a nuclear exchange between the United States and Russia and the United States and China, our goal is to keep enough of our civilization intact that we are the largest surviving civilization while we destroy the rest of the world. I would like to ask Joe Biden, because here's the thing, Jimmy, to show you this. Joe Biden knows this because he's been in the Senate. He's been the vice president. When he ran for president, he said, I want to change the nuclear posture of the United States to a deterrence-only model, meaning that it's a single use, that we only have nuclear weapons for one thing. And that's if you drop nuclear weapons on us, we use nuclear weapons against you. That's it. Sole use. He promised that he would do this. I went to a INF reunion, Intermediate Nuclear Forces reunion, where all the arms control people, the inspectors, the negotiators were there. And they brought in a senior administration official who asked to remain anonymous. And they were asked the question by us, the guys who got rid of nuclear weapons, who know something about arms control. We said, the president ran on this platform. Why didn't it happen? He's the commander in chief. Why didn't he keep this promise, the most critical promise? And they said, well, the interagency wasn't ready for this. Now, did you vote for the interagency in the last election, Jimmy? Did you see them on the ballot?
The interagency?
The interagency. So that's the deep state.
That's the group of the Defense Department, the CIA, Department of Energy.
The Nazis.
They basically, the establishment come together in a group, in a cabal, and they control the national security of the United States. The interagency wasn't ready for this. Well, I mean, my God, couldn't the president just say, hey, interagency, you're fired. You're all fired. You're all unemployed right now. And I will only hire people that are ready to do this. But Joe Biden backed down because every president backs down because you can't take on the establishment. And that's the problem.
Which is what Chuck Schumer told Rachel Maddow, that if Trump he's not being nice to the CIA and the FBI and the deep state, and they've got 6 ways to Sunday to mess with you. Well, we see how it is, right? They did Russiagate on him. They lied to the FISA court 17 times to get taps on his phones. They've impeached him twice, and now they've got 4 different felony trials against him, one more ridiculous than the next, and they just convicted him. So, so that's what that. So even if you are a mild speed bump, which is all Trump really was to empire, a mild speed bump, this is what they'll do to you. And so Chuck Schumer really did give the game away. It's like the CIA, the NSA, the FBI. They don't work for the president. They don't. They work for
themselves.
They work for themselves and a handful of billionaires who actually run things.
Probably trillionaires. Wait, yeah. Scott, well, is that continuance of government? Is that what you're talking about with the keeping the last civilization around? Like whenever the Edward Teller made the hydrogen bomb, they started having this whole thing of digging bases so that the powerful could be safe. Is that what that is?
Well, absolutely. The irony here, and I again, forgive my smile, Jimmy. Sometimes things are just so ridiculous that you have to smile. And if you don't find humor in life, you go insane. But the irony is all these guys who have fallen in love with nuclear war now, they think that all that infrastructure still exists. They think they're going to live. But what they don't realize is when the Cold War ended, we stopped funding that. I used to train as a firefighter in hazmat response. We would do railroad rescue operations in one of these places where they used to have a train line going into a tunnel into a mountain, where they would take all the congressmen and everything in there to hide. Well, they shut that facility down. They haven't been maintaining it. It's mothballed. And we've been using those tracks to train on derailment. And these guys believe that if they have a nuclear war, they're going to get on a train and it's going to take them someplace to live. They're going to show up in one of these facilities and realize that the filters haven't been serviced. And radioactivity is going to come down. They said, well, that can't happen. You guys didn't fund the servicing of the filters. The water supply hasn't been replenished. You're all going to die. And I just hope that I'm still alive when the flash comes in their head that they screwed up, that they thought they were going to be part of the 30% to survive. And the realization is nobody survives because nobody's ready for what a nuclear war is going to bring on this world.
Well, what about that $2 trillion they keep losing every so often? I bet you could fund some pretty cool stuff with that.
Vegas, baby, Vegas. Yeah. I don't know where it went.
Okay. All right, Scott Ritter, I appreciate. Thanks for your insight into all this. That's chilling, actually. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, pal. Hey, get this. So we all know that the mainstream news media is not reliable. How can you trust them when they've never told you the truth about Russiagate, Ukraine, COVID, lockdowns, anything? That's where our sponsor, we have a new sponsor, Ground News, comes in handy. Ground News is an app and a website. And what they do is they gather related articles from around the world in one place so you can compare coverage. So it's not, they don't generate the news, they compile the news, and then They give you the visual breakdown of the news outlets and tell you if the source has a political bias, and if it does, what's the political bias, and how reliable that the reporting is, and who owns them. So it's super helpful and transparent. Check this out. So like if you search Russia-Ukraine, search Russia-Ukraine war, and you'll see how it's covered. Here we see 111 total news sources. 18 of them are left-leaning. 9 are right-leaning, and 27 of them are centrist. The bias distribution is 50% center, and it even shows their logos along with their factuality and ownership. So this is a pretty helpful. This is pretty. Dare I say, use an old-timey term. This is a neat website. So this is a good way to do your own research. So you get there, you see they help you by seeing what the bias is, by who owns these news outlets, but they compiles all different kinds of sources around one news story. So it gets you access to independent and international perspectives, not just nationalist sources with the same political agenda. It helps you find the discrepancies in how certain topics are covered and shows you how corporate agendas can influence the news you read. Sounds a lot like this show. Sounds like this website does what this show does. Sounds nice. So if you want to see it for yourself, go to ground.news/JD. Ground.news/JD. Use the link below, and we're going to get you 40% off unlimited access. Go to ground.news/JD, and we're going to get you 40% off unlimited access. Think critically about the news you consume. You can come see me on tour in Rutherford, New Jersey, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Ontario, California, Las Vegas, Davenport, Iowa, Chicago, Illinois. We're doing a live panel video show, special surprise guests on that show, and Grand Rapids, Michigan. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and make sure you go to Jimmy Dore because they don't want to buy it from a second reseller.